And okay, got it. There's recording going on. Okay, fine. That's all right. There's the de facto policy and there's the de jure policy. Now the problem is in most well-functioning countries, the de jure and de facto policies are more or less aligned in the same direction. There might be a slight 5-10 degree deviance. Okay. But unfortunately, in Nepal, what we are finding is that the gap between the de jure stated policy and the de facto actual policy on the ground that moves things are wide apart. The best example I can give you is if you go to the Climate Action Network. Now, there's this COP going on in Glasgow soon, and our Prime Minister has just left, I think. Okay. A civil society assessment of Nepal Cancer, Nepal climate chapter of the Climate Assessment, Climate Action Network, South Asia, produced in 2018 a status of climate action in Nepal. Okay, what it showed was Nepal's climate policies were so good that, well, probably Nepal deserved a Nobel Prize on climate policy. But if you looked at the climate action, we were moving in a fossil fuel addiction direction. Policies said one thing, but actual on the ground, our fossil fuel consumption was galloping like nobody's business. Okay, so that showed a tremendous gap, which meant that while Nepal deserved the Nobel Prize for climate policies, it deserved to be locked in a dungeon and whipped for actual climate addiction, okay, or fossil fuel addiction. So this de facto and de jure gaps are very wide. Now on water, we have a similar problem, and not only we, but our dear neighbor to the south, our riparian southern neighbor, has equally big gaps between de jure policy and de facto policy. Okay, and which I will get into in a while. Okay, so the point of diplomacy is actually to unearth, the strands of that gap and try to figure out what are those hidden concerns that lets a country, a business house, NGOs, or whoever, from going away from what is stated. Everybody wants development, but then actually doing things that oppose development projects, and for some good reasons, actually, they are opposed. Okay, so to find that gap is the purpose and the mission of diplomacy. So hydro diplomacy is precisely the area where we should be looking at for projects that are stalled in water resources, whether they are, I don't know, Melamchi, Mahakali, whatever, Budi Gandaki, whatever. Why are things stalled? What is happening between the de jure policy and the de facto policy? And doing that requires a lot of diplomacy. Now, there are different types of diplomacy. I'll get into that. But the essential pillar on which diplomacy stands is first to find the high moral ground. What is that high moral ground? And very often development is that high moral ground. Everybody wants development. Okay, now it could be good development, it could be bad development, subikas or kubikas. That's where all the fight is. Not all stated developments are good because some people don't like it, and for good reasons. Okay, so first find the moral ground of where everyone would be able to agree, and then to use persuasive power, not coercive power. Army, police, courts, these are coercive power. You follow the rules, you're okay. You don't follow, we'll put you in jail, we'll do all kinds of things. Okay, that's coercive power. What we do in diplomacy is use persuasive power. That is, convince the other guys, that it is also in their interest, not only our interest, to do whatever we think should be done. Okay, so that is it. Okay, who muted me? Sorry, don't go around muting me. Okay. Okay, I'm going to read I've just talked about high moral ground and using persuasive power. And I'm going to use a quote here from this chapter of my book here in Anjan Shakya's book. Okay. And essentially what it is a quote, 1945 February, just before the end of the Second World War. when British were still ruling India. And Juddha Samsher had tried to initiate water resource development in Nepal with the cooperation of the Japanese, the British, and so on and so forth. So this is a secret note, which is now not secret. It's there in the British Library, where I found it when I was a visiting scholar in Oxford, 1993. Okay, and this is February 18, 1945. Happens to be Fagun Sat, by the way, February 18, okay, 1945, written by somebody called Sir Maurice Hallett, okay, who's the governor of what is now Uttar Pradesh, United Province, to the cabinet secretary of the government of British Raj India, Sir Olaf Caro. Okay, and it's a very interesting quote. I'll read. Now, this is the sort of thing that Nepali diplomacy should have found out, and this is valid even today. Okay, sorry. The quote goes, I found the short note prepared in the External Affairs Department on Nepal and post-war development, post-Second World War. Okay, very interesting. The destinies of Nepal and India are very closely linked, and we should do everything possible to foster good relations between the two countries, especially as we owe her, in Nepal, a big debt on account of the Gorkha battalions during the war. Okay, existing differences of opinion on customs and excise matters should not be allowed to hold up help to Nepal to advance herself. The suggestion that this help should take the form of a storage dam and hydroelectric power station is, I think, an admirable one. This would not only give Nepal a basis on which she could build local industries, but would also materially benefit the eastern districts of the United Provinces and Bihar, which could draw on Nepal for power. It would also focus attention in Nepal to water development and storage, as this might eventually lead to the possibility of flood control in the lower Ganges Valley. Somebody is talking. Please mute your phone, okay? Mute your thing. But this could lead to the possibility of flood control in the lower Ganges Valley. Okay, without some check on the Nepalese rivers, such as the Gogra, Rapti, and Gandak, flooding in eastern UP and Bihar, United Provinces and Bihar, cannot be kept under control. Ibbotson, one of my advisors, he was the chief irrigation engineer of United Provinces, who has an intimate knowledge of Himalayas and its rivers, was so struck by this suggestion that he considered Nepal should be given a free gift of a storage dam and powerhouse. I repeat, Ibbotson suggests that Nepal should be given a free gift of a storage dam and powerhouse. He was of the opinion that though this ostensibly might be given as a reward for war work, okay, in effect, it would ultimately prove to be of material benefit to the United Provinces in the center of North India. Now, this kind of stuff is the essence of hydrodiplomacy, okay? And this is where we should be going to find out what the other side thinks, both the good thing it thinks, as well as the negative thing it thinks, okay? So this is where it is. Now, let me go into some of our hydro accidents, diplomatic accidents. And let me describe some good successes, or very mild good successes we've had. Two that I had managed to push when I was Minister for Water Resources way back, what is it, 18 years ago. Seems like almost another lifetime ago, 18 years ago, 2002, 2003. I initiated the first visit official visit by a water resource minister to Bihar. I wanted to do Bihar and Uttar Pradesh because these are our adjoining states. Now, Kathmandu talking to Delhi alone does not solve the problem, because the interests of Uttar Pradesh and Bihar are very different. You know, Bihar wants flood control, Uttar Pradesh wants irrigation, Delhi wants electricity. I mean, there's contradiction within India itself, okay? So these have to be understood. So I took a group, basically from the Water and Energy Commission, plus the DWIDP, the flood department that we have in Pulchok, okay? I did not take the hydroelectricity people, and I did not take the irrigation people, because I knew that in Bihar, it was basically floods that they were interested in, and our purpose was to have some official, unofficial, sort of exchange of views and so on and so forth, okay? Well, the ambassador in Kathmandu, Shyam Sharan, who became foreign secretary later, he was dead opposed to it. But he had to allow me at least to go to Bihar. He stymied the visit to UP. He didn't allow that to happen. And our government then went away. And so the question of doing that again was not there. And I realized why, because most of the border inundation problems are actually with Uttar Pradesh and less with Bihar, except for Gaur, a little bit at Gaur. Most of the problems of inundation by India building embankments are in Uttar Pradesh. And this is what Shyam Sharan didn't want us to apparently talk about. But the visit was amazing, because after that visit, I was told that we have 16 or so subcommittees between Nepal and India, none of which are functioning. But the Standing Committee on Inundation and Floods, SCIF or whatever it's called, meeting subsequent to that visit was extremely successful, because informally our people had managed to talk to people, find out what their real concerns was, and things that could not even be on the Nepal, on the official agenda, people were already aware of. As a result, the sensitive things that governments don't like to put on the agenda. Well, as a result, that meeting was apparently very successful. This is just one example. The other example was that with the permission of His Majesty the King then, what I argued for was, yes, we should do official Nepal government, India government, Nepal Electricity Authority, Power Trade India kind of, work together. But we should also get Indian business and Nepali businesses cooperating jointly to build hydropower and other plants here. Okay. To that effect, FNCCI and the Indian Chamber of Commerce had begun work. We did a lot of footwork there, and there was going to be a big meeting in Kathmandu to be jointly inaugurated by me as Water Resource Minister and India's minister. I believe that time was BJP government, Sitaram Gite or Gitaram Site, whatever the minister's name was. Okay. However, the Indian embassy here would not even forward that letter to Delhi. Okay. And later I found out why, because India government or the South Bloc was dead against even Indian businesses coming into Nepal to build hydropower. They were only interested in official NHPC coming in. And there's a very interesting story of the late Janaklal Karamacharya. He had come to me for advice for the meeting. I told him, okay, and he told me a few things. I said, just keep quiet and let the Indian guy do the talking. So when the meeting began, Janak just began talking about joint cooperation. And the NHPC person then finally blurted out, saying, we are very happy to do a joint venture with NEA. Yeah. But I don't know why the government of India and the Indian embassy here keeps telling me no joint venture, no joint venture. India should do a separate project by itself in Nepal. Okay. Now, this brings into some very interesting problems, which is that there's an unofficial, India claims it's not a policy anymore, but there's an unofficial policy in India that India will not buy power coming from outside, that is Nepal included, where India's companies or government of India does not have at least 51% share. So if the Chinese invest here, the Americans invest or do anything here, India is not going to buy that power. Now that is an unofficial de facto policy. Okay, despite the claims that, oh no, that's suspended or something, it's a very murky area. Okay, so business to business contacts, this is where diplomacy is also needed. Now, I'll just list some of the problems. For instance, when the Kosi and Gandak treaties were signed, we didn't have a powerful water ministry or anything like that, or irrigation department. So we have the provisions of liaison officers. Now, I was stunned to find out, because I was arguing that officially the liaison officer for Kosi and Gandak should be the Kshetriya Nirdeshak, the director generals of irrigation departments of either East or center or wherever, to these meetings. Okay, but it turns out that there were political appointees who had absolutely no idea of what irrigation was at all, only because their salaries were to be paid from Patna. Now imagine Nepali liaison officer getting his salary from Patna, and they came to complain to me because the Patna government had withheld that salary. Now this is a travesty. How can anybody, a Nepali, that too a political figure, expect to serve Nepal's interest when he draws his salary out of Patna? So there are these kind of problems. India's river linking, we have not really seriously done the diplomacy that is needed. NGOs have. At the academic and NGO level, we really know what India's river linking is. There's a huge opposition in India and so on. But officially, we are nowhere. Okay. Similarly, Arun 3. Now, one of the biggest problems with Arun 3 diplomatically for me was that China was going to, and that's the biggest river coming from China, Transboundary River, we really don't have. Most of our rivers originate south of the Himalaya. But Arun is the only one that has a huge catchment, so big that the catchment of Arun in Tibet is bigger than Kosi in Bihar. Okay. Now, China was going to, when this project was going on, one value of Arun 3 project was there's a high dry season flow because of this huge catchment in Tibet. But China was going to build the Peng Choi irrigation project. The tragedy was the Nepal government, rather than talking to China directly on this issue, assigned the World Bank to talk on our behalf with China. Now, can you think of a bigger travesty? Not talking to your neighbor about a problem, but assigning a third person to do the talking, which means the Chinese never took us seriously, I think, after that, okay? Similarly, big problem in water diplomacy is, as I said, UP is interested in irrigation, okay? And Bihar in flood control. Neither of them are really interested in power, okay? It's secondary, it's a POSA benefit, okay? But India does not want to talk about the value of regulated water. We're not talking about naturally flowing water. We're talking about water that's produced water behind a dam, okay, where lots of money has been spent, villages have been uprooted, fields have been, forests have been drowned, okay, and that water has value. But India does not want to talk about that. And my argument is that value, of that water is much higher than the value of electricity. Now, it depends on how you calculate, but as a resource economist, when I do my calculation as a political economist, I find out that the value of stored water is way, way higher. I'll give you an example. Central Valley, I wrote my master's thesis at Berkeley on the Central Valley project of California. It was discovered that the amount of irrigation benefits that the Central Valley irrigation produced in California was way, way higher than all the gold found during the gold rush in California. It depends on how you calculate. Now you can see that, these are extremely high values. Now, we haven't got to talking about that. That would be a strong bargaining point for Nepal to talk about the value of water and getting these other benefits to pay for it. Now, the opening is there. For instance, India has passed this Inland Navigation Act for 111 waterways. Okay. Now, developing waterway on the Ganga would immensely benefit landlocked Nepal. And that form of transport is 1,000 times cheaper than by road and even railways. Okay. Now, no area of the world has really developed, no region, whether North America with Mississippi or Rhine in Europe or Volga in Russia or Yangtze in China, has not developed without developing inland transport, because it's the cheapest form of transport, and that makes everything very much more competitive. Okay. Now, but the trouble is, on the Ganga, you cannot go for navigation without building storage dams in Nepal, because the dry season flow of the Ganga will not allow the passage of barges. Okay, I've been part of this navigation debate in India, in Shillong, and just 2 weeks ago, I was in a big meeting in Guwahati. I had to do it by Zoom, although it was face-to-face meeting. And what was interesting in the Shillong meeting was they had invited a lot of people from Nepal to come, but officially nobody went. Bangladesh sent a delegation of 148 people with 2 cabinet ministers. From Nepal, no official participation, even though they were invited. And only 2 jokers showed up, me, an academic from NAST, okay, and the editor of Spotlight Case of Paudel. We're the only 2 Nepalis there. Okay. And this is so significant for us, because navigation would give us access to the sea and cheaper produce in Nepal, reducing our cost of development tremendously. Okay. But here it is impossible without storage in Nepal. And this, has not been really pursued. So you see the diplomatic failures of Nepal. I will conclude. I mean, I'm coming to the last part now. How do you now then, with hydrodiplomacy, assure national interest? Okay. First and foremost, diplomacy cannot be successful without, or let me put it this way, a diplomat abroad is only as successful as his government is strong behind him. Okay. If you have a weak government, if you have governments, but we have 30 governments in the last 25 years or whatever, you get 26 years. Okay. You cannot do good diplomacy. Okay. But then corollary of that is you have to find a strong consensus within your own country. Is there a consensus? If there is no consensus, you cannot do diplomacy. Okay, there's been our past ambassador of the US has been withdrawn. He had just gone there. I find it very strange because the parliamentary committee that consisted also of Nepali Congress, UML, every party actually passed all those appointments, even though they were political appointment. But now for this new government to withdraw all political ambassadors means you are against your own constitutional provision. It's a travesty. Poor man probably had not even begun unpacking his bag. Now he's back. The other one nominated there, I believe, is Sridhar Khatri, who's just been nominated to go there. He's a nice guy. Sridhar is a very knowledgeable chap. Okay. In face of MCC conflict and controversy in Nepal, how effective would Yuvraj Khatiwada or Sridhar Khatri be in America unless a consensus is found here in Nepal? Okay. Now, where is the problem? The problem can be solved in this consensus way within government and outside government in two ways. And those are my final points. Okay. The strong consensus within Nepal can come by transforming Water and Energy Commission. It's one of the most powerful institutions for proper consensus building for hydro diplomacy within Nepal. Unfortunately, it has been grossly misused over the last 40 years of its history. Okay, it is the only place where there are in my time it was 12. I understand now there are 14 secretaries of governments. Foreign ministry, finance ministry, this oil ministry, of course, water ministry, energy ministry, forest ministry. They're all members there. Okay, now consensus between different ministries and disciplines could be found within WEX, but then it has not happened. WEX has been used as a dumping ground for unwanted bureaucrats. Okay. Now, what I suggested, and it's in this book by Anjan Shakya, I tried that when I was minister, but unfortunately we were about to do those reforms when our government fell. Okay. But there were two simple reforms that were needed. First, having all these cabinet level secretaries from different ministries there on the board, it is wrong to have only water minister or energy minister as the chair. The chairmanship should rotate among ministries for different ministers. So I was quite prepared and had done all the work to make sure that the foreign minister became chair of WEX after me. Okay, it didn't happen because our government fell. The second is to make sure that all these 14 ministries have representation on short-term deputation, 2 months, 6 months, 1 year, of joint secretary level people, working there on particular issues pertaining to to water and energy from their ministry. So if there's forest ministry, they should be there working on things like watershed management and, getting rid of deforestation and wood as fuel and so on and so forth. Same with oil ministry, same with foreign ministry, finance ministry, and so on and so forth. Okay. Now, they would have to produce policy papers. If they did that, then that would really create the consensus within. Read an article in Himal, South Asia, long ago by Paul Terrell, who was Bechtel's advisor to the Karnali, that Chisapani, that 15-volume work. Okay, he wrote a brilliant article. It's only 2 pages, which says Nepal's real power in diplomacy is the ability to say, as an upstream country, no. So Nepal should be very careful before saying yes. So without doing your homework, don't say yes, because once you say yes, your power is gone. It moves to financiers, bankers, India, every other place, So it's very important. Finally, more important is finding consensus in the wider political terrain. So this requires also bringing in consensus within the country on the market players as well as civic movements. Now, we talk about track-through diplomacy, where NGOs and all, get together and talk outside of the government. But that needs business-to-business contacts and diplomacy. That needs academia to academia, and it needs NGOs to NGOs. That's going on quite effectively, actually, much more than the official one. Okay, now, on track 1 is moribund right now because we have 14 or whatever committees that are not functioning, subcommittees. So what we need is track 1.5 diplomacy, which means that track 1 people are invited to track 2 meetings, not to express their opinion. Government bureaucrats should not express opinions in meetings like that, but to understand, and by a process of osmosis, to understand the concerns that are going on in the business community as well as in the NGO and civic movement committee. I'll finish by giving an example of a success of that, because we have COP26 going on. Since Kyoto, COP has not succeeded at all. It's been a failure. We also argue that COP26 will fail. Let's concentrate on COP27 in Africa next year and so on. That's a different issue. I'm on a panel, in a couple of days. Okay, but Richard Benedict was US ambassador to the United Nations. I worked with him between 93 and 98, producing this Human Choice and Climate Change book, 4-volume. He produced this book called Ozone Diplomacy. He worked on the ozone diplomacy, and ozone diplomacy, ozone is one of the successful treaties, whereas climate change treaty is not successful. Okay, how did that happen? Because there was a consensus of building within businesses and activists, not just governments. And it was the American business and American civic movement that put pressure on the American government to sign this treaty. It would not have happened just by other countries putting pressure on American government. So this is an example of ozone diplomacy, which is very successful, that we should use in hydro diplomacy. I'll end with that and take, let's take the discussions further. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dipak sir. Very enlightening presentation, like always. We always love to hear you. I think to move forward with the discussion, we already have at least a couple of questions in the chat box. Let me pick out whatever we can manage. The first question is from Dr. Khemraj Sharma. He has asked that differences on the understanding of provision of Mahakali Treaty between Nepal and India. It's said to be a problem not letting the DPR getting finalized. Could you please shed light on the possibility of getting DPR approved and moving forward with the ambitious Pancheshwar project?
Okay, better than me is Madhav Belbasi, who could speak on this, because he's been the last one on the hot seat. Okay, someday I think we'll get Madhavji to talk about it. But let me describe what was the problem. Even as the Mahakali Treaty was being formulated, Kirtinidhi Bishta, former Prime Minister, myself, a whole lot of us were opposed to it. Why? Because the provisions in the treaty were not in favor of Nepal. Okay, I should say that I'm putting up a reference there of a recent article of mine on the 25th anniversary of the failure of Mahakali Treaty in e-Kagaj. I'll put it up in the chat box in a while. But and Dwarika Dhungelji is coming out with a book on that, on what happened during that time. It's a very interesting book. You should read it. I've managed to see the draft. Okay, but essentially the provision, article number 3 of the exchange of letters, really went against the very concept of Mahakali Saja Pani Adha, or whatever, Mahakali is equal, water is equal, because it completely demolishes that very provision. Now, as a result of that, it has not gone. Now, the second problem, it has not gone forward, is nothing to do with Nepal. The reason is, when the Mahakali Treaty was signed, Uttar Pradesh was one big state. 2 years after Mahakali Treaty was signed, Uttarakhand became a separate state. And Uttarakhand has the same problem with the remaining with the plains Uttar Pradesh as Nepal has with India, which is that Uttar Pradesh guys, I talked to all the activists there, I talked to all the academics in, Dehradun, Nainital, all these places, okay? What they say is, why the hell should we drown our villages and fields just so that Uttar Pradesh gets free water? So we need to be paid for the cost of drowning our villages, okay? So Mahakali Treaty will not move forward for hardly anything Nepal says, I think. It will not move forward mainly because until Uttarakhand is placated, it won't go ahead. We can just watch the fun now.
Thank you. I think Madhav sir might have some opinion, but we will come back to him later because there are several other questions in the chat box. We will hear someday from Madhav sir, if time allows, at the end of this conversation. There's another one from Sudas Galaxy. He may not be from Galaxy, but we don't know the full name. Bihar is constructing a Kosi-Mechi linkage project. So is there further ground to cooperation between India and Nepal in flood control from high dam in Nepal? Would you please shed light on it, or your opinion?
Okay, this is a very painful topic because it ties up with India's river linking, okay, which is a big controversy within India. Only we academics and NGOs have begun to understand, because we deal with these guys all the time, Indian academics and activists, okay? And they're not very happy with those projects, the river linking project. Now, the reason, one of the problem is India has still maintained an official secrecy, even though we have all those documents, okay, informally, unofficially, that the non-peninsular rivers, as they call them, which is basically Ganga, and Brahmaputra, that is secret. They are not sharing with the countries. And there are plans to build these massive river linking canals in Nepali territory. Now, how can you build those bloody things without first taking Nepal into confidence? Okay. And that process has not begun. And one of the big problems, as we found out in 1991, the Himalaya Ganga conference in Patna, I was there. And one of the things was interesting was that the Indian professors were already saying, we don't discuss with Nepal beforehand. What we do is we take our own decision in India and present Nepal with a fait accompli, saying you agree to this. And then put pressure on Nepal, do a blockade, do all kinds of crazy things, you know, and that leads to a lot of bad blood. Okay, so there is that problem of those linking projects are within Nepal, but Nepal has never really formally been consulted. And the cost of doing those things within Nepal have not been discussed. A better citing of those links within Nepal might benefit Nepal too. We don't know. Nobody has discussed this. So there is the potential to discuss, but right now that diplomacy is still missing.
Thank you, sir. And there are a couple of more very interesting questions indeed. There is one from our own Bir Singh Dhami. What he says is, can we say the Indian model for water resources development in Nepal resemble Arun Thar model? His meaning for Arun Thar model is to develop by its own investment and companies and get its benefit.
This is a painful topic. Very painful. Okay, I've written lots about it in international books, journals, magazines, and many other places. I have also written in Nepali on this. Our fundamental difference with Arun 3 World Bank and Arun 3 Satluj, okay, there are two very different problems with them. The World Bank Arun 3 was not about Gaida and Putali and the environment at all. Our opposition was that it was being built at 5 times the market rate. When projects of that type can be built easily for under $1,000 per kilowatt, it was being planned to be built at $5,400 per kilowatt, which meant the Nepali consumer is going to be totally shafted. So that was our main opposition. And that is why the World Bank collapsed, not because of Madhav Nepal's letter or anything. World Bank doesn't give a damn about the Madhav Nepals of the world. Okay, let's just forget Nepal. With the parties then made the big mistake, Nepali Congress and UML, it's my strong view, that after the collapse of Arun 3, rather than learning the lesson and trying to find out what went wrong with it, they started this political campaign, Jasari bhaye pani Arun firta garchu. We'll return Arun 3 at all cost. No, damn it, you don't return at all cost. You return it at a cheap cost and a right way, okay? So what they did was they ended up illegally, to our mind, because there's still a case in the court pending, you know, all these years, giving that project to Satluj for export to India, violating Article 126 of the Constitution, now 279 in this current one, okay, without a parliamentary consensus or passing of the parliament. And as a result, this cheap site that should have generated cheap electricity for Nepal and Nepali industries to make Nepali industries competitive, you know, globally, that cheap electricity is being given to India, which means factories will be set up there. Please read a report by Nexant, a USAID funded company that did the study, which showed that if Nepal exported electricity, it would get 6 cents maximum, okay? If Nepal used that electricity within Nepal for industries, it would generate 86 cents of value added in the industry and commerce. So are you better off getting 6 cents or getting 86 cents? So this is where our big fight currently and that Satluj model is going on.
Thank you, sir. It's always very great to have benefited from your vast wealth of knowledge. There are 2 more questions for the time being, and we would encourage all the participants to pose more questions or comments or opinions on these very interesting topics, because I see many experts with the vast knowledge on these topics in the audience. Please feel free to speak out by raising your hand, and also you can maximize the use of the chat box. 2 more questions. One from Thakur Sharma, sir. Mm-hmm. How is track to diplomacy with India currently, as you have talked about Shillong meeting recently? Where do we stand now?
Bad. I'll tell you why. Because while that track 2 thing is going on, it is the younger generation of scholars are not really participating to the extent that's necessary. I'm not seeing that. I mean, the last bunch of people really to participate are you know, people like me, and you know, many others of our generation. But then, I would say, why is it that the new generation of scholars, new generation of activists are really not as actively participating? Okay, so what is needed is participation at the academic level, people to people. Not enough is happening. Okay, participation across media. Indian media is writing absolute crap about Nepal. And, I was at a recent sort of a similar water meeting where people in India were really stunned. Everybody talked about the Uttarakhand flood. I mean, come on, Nepal suffered equally. So when I told them we lost 6 billion rupees worth of rice crop in the flood just 2 weeks back in Western Nepal, they were stunned. They said, nobody in India has even written about it. Okay. Now, this is a travesty. Okay. This is an absolute travesty. So in a sense, the track 2 is not working. And so there is very little chance of track 1.5 that I'm arguing. In these track 2 meetings, what we should do is invite the senior level officials of government and political parties, not to say anything, but just to sit and listen. And when they do that, what happens is, by a process of osmosis, because these issues discussed by NGOs, activists, academics are too sensitive to put on a track 1 agenda. Governments don't like to put things on agenda if there isn't some kind of an idea of what the solutions might look like. That's the nature of governments. So to come to that point, we need to really go to track, this track 1.5. So I think, it's in a sad state. The short answer to your question is, it's in a very, very sad state. Not enough.
Thank you, sir. There are 2 questions very related. Let me read out them, and so that it will be easier for you to answer. One is from.
I've just put out some of my,
Yes.
Thing on the thing, so you can copy it. Yeah.
Yes, I saw there. I was thinking that there are 2 Dipak Gyawalis. One is speaking, one is writing. Thank you.
No, I've got it on slide. I'm copying and pasting, so I couldn't type that fast.
All right. There are 2 questions related. One is from Dr. Saroj Karge, who is very rising cadre from the Department of Water Resources and Irrigation. If we summarize the chronology of our water diplomacy from the past to present, will it be correct to say that Nepal itself has been very weak and lack strong vision regarding how to utilize its water resources, rather than blaming India for our underachievement? And from the both angle, institutionally and from diplomatically, do you suggest any restructuring of our water-related institutions for strengthening water diplomacy? And the very related another question is from Dhruva Paudel. Would you please recommend or suggest a roadmap to both the governments that become win-win to the both sides? Yes, sir, please.
Okay. Yeah, I know. There's a lot we can be doing. What I would say is, blaming India is okay. There's a lot to blame India for, but it doesn't solve our problem, you see. Just blaming India, they'll just say, oh, it's anti-Indianism, Although I've written an article basically saying that's a cop-out on the part of India. With Ramaswamy Iyer, when we had this debate. He was one of the best water secretaries of India. He's passed away. But I said, before Indians can talk about anti-Indianism, you start bloody well talking about what is Indianism that people are against in Nepal, Bangladesh, and all. So if there's an article in Spotlight, you can read of mine, and there's several problems with that. But still, it does not help, ultimately, it's we who have to be correct. Now, there are 2 or 3 problems that we should get out of our head. One, this what I call the hydrodollar fallacy. I've already said a little bit about it, that, we can export electricity and, become like the sheikhs of Araby, scratching our bellies and not doing any work. Okay. Impossible. In India, water is a strategic and electricity is a strategic resource, which means Indian policy is to get that as cheap as possible to market, cost price as possible. Now, if we export something cheap at cost price and not market price, don't expect much to happen. Okay, there's no benefit to it. And like I said, this great American study, USAID study, shows that export, we get only 6 cents. Using that electricity within Nepal per unit, we'd get 86 cents. Okay, so the hydrodollar fallacy has to go out first. And the second thing I would strongly recommend is that most of the projects that are stalled between Nepal and India are storage projects. This run-of-river projects are useless. I mean, let's not even bother to talk about it. And we have a lot of problem with them within Nepal right now. Pampa Bhusal notwithstanding with this thing, whatever tariff she's done with it. Okay, the problem is that we should first of all start thinking of building a storage project in Nepal for Nepal without any export component. And to my mind, Budi Gandaki is the best example of that. Budi Gandaki is not a hydroelectric project. It's a multi-purpose project. It would generate irrigation from the stored water in Chitwan and Nawalparasi for extra 1 lakh hectares. If we don't use that, that water will go in the dry season to India and irrigate 1 lakh hectares in India for free. Do we really want that? Drowning our villages so that Indian villages get free water in the dry season, produce cauliflower, export in Nepal, we buy that, and do you think we'll be rich? No. Okay. Second, there is a huge inland navigation potential on the Budi Gandaki. The reservoir is 40 kilometers north-south, which means from Mugling, you can practically reach the Chinese border by a boat on the Budi Gandaki reservoir. It would obviate the need for equivalent 250 kilometer road. So that 40 kilometer on the reservoir, if you built a road, you would have to go 240 kilometers or 50 kilometers. Okay. So that is another additional benefit. Flood control benefit from that. Okay. Fisheries benefit, tourism benefit because of this massive reservoir and, you know, the nice spot that Kulikhani now is giving and all that. Now, these have to be brought in. And if we learn how to build a multi-purpose project in Nepal, for Nepal, we'll have a better idea of what the price of water is. And we can negotiate with India and Bangladesh and everybody else much better. Until we do that, I mean, we may just have to take at face value whatever Indians say, which is there is no value to stored water. Okay. So this is my answer.
Thank you, sir. There is one question, maybe we'll come back to later. People, we love to hear from you about the MCC controversy, but you'll have only 2 minutes, not now, maybe a bit later. Before going to that one, do anyone has any questions or comments or opinions that you would like to share on this very interesting topics? I mean, interestingly, not MCC, but on the theme of our discussion, please. Yeah. MCC, Dipak sir will talk for sure.
2 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyone? If not, maybe Dipak sir has, indicated Madhav sir in the beginning. Would you like to share some light, sir?
Yeah, he's raised his hands. Yeah.
Dipak sir, namaskar. Sathiyahru sabaiलाई namaskar. Vishnu ji, namaskar. वास्तवमा अब यो 25 को चाहिँ अलिकति भन्न चाहिँ उपयुक्त हुन्छ जस्तो लाग्छ मलाई चाहिँ, किन भन्दाखेरि
Sir, you have 3 minutes, right? You have 3 minutes to talk. Thank you.
3 minutes लगिहाल्छ नि। अब यहाँ नयाँ भाइहरु पनि हुनुहुन्छ हैन, अब जसले चाहिँ अलिकति हाम्रो चाहिँ अलिकति क्यारी अन पनि गर्नुपर्ने अवस्था छ। त्यसकारणले गर्दाखेरि शेयर गर्दाखेरि उपयुक्त हुन्छ जस्तो लाग्छ। एउटा विषय चाहिँ पञ्चेश्वरमा अरु जेसुकै भने तापनि अब इन्टरप्रिटेसनमा आफ्ना आफ्ना कुराहरु होला, तर चाहिँ पञ्चेश्वरको क्लज 3 त्यसैगरी चाहिँ कोशी एग्रीमेन्टको क्लज 5 र गण्डक एग्रीमेन्टको क्लज 9 यिनीहरु चाहिँ हाम्रो लागि चाहिँ ब्रह्मास्त्र हुन् के खास। यो एग्रीमेन्टमा अरु जेसुकै भने तापनि यो तीनटा क्लज तीनटैमा चाहिँ एक एकवटा क्लज चाहिँ ब्रह्मास्त्रको चाहिँ रहेको छ। पञ्चेश्वरको पनि क्लज 3 चाहिँ ब्रह्मास्त्र नै हो एक किसिमले, जसले गर्दा अहिलेसम्म चाहिँ यो समस्या चाहिँ अड्केर बसेको छ। किन भन्दाखेरि त्यहाँ चाहिँ जुन कन्जम्पटिभ युज पछिको बाँकी बचेको पानी 50-50% शेयर हुन्छ भन्ने छ। त्यसमा चाहिँ अब लोअर शारदाको चाहिँ 4.79 BCM वाटर एउटा कन्टेन्सस इस्यु भएको छ। किनभने टोटल पहिलो इस्यु चाहिँ नम्बर 1 टोटल महाकालीमा पानी कति छ भन्ने पनि एउटा कन्टेन्सस इस्यु भएको छ। डिपिआर चाहिँ सल्भ मतलब डिपिआर चाहिँ फाइनल नहुनुमा अब 22 टनकपुरमा चाहिँ 22 BCM पानी देखिरहेको छ, उनीहरुले 20 BCM सम्म चाहिँ एग्री गरेका छ। 2 BCM पानी अझै पनि त्यहाँ गोलमाल भइरहेको छ, एउटा इस्यु थियो। अब त्यो 20 र 22 ले कति फरक पार्छ भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ इन्डियाको टोटल कन्जम्पटिभ युज इन्क्लुडिङ नभनौं त्यसलाई चाहिँ इन्डियाको चाहिँ 4.79 चाहिँ लोअर शारदाको 7 BCM चाहिँ अहिले एक्जिस्टिङ शारदाको गर्दा 11.79 चाहिँ उनीहरुले क्लेम गरिरहेको टोटल र नेपालको हकमा चाहिँ करिब चाहिँ 4.7 जतिको चाहिँ एक्जिस्टिङ र कन्जम्पटिभ युज गरेर चाहिँ आइरहेको अवस्था छ। अब यो 22 BCM पानीलाई चाहिँ हाम्रो हिसाबले चाहिँ के भइरहेको छ भन्दाखेरि करिब 6.8 BCM पानी चाहिँ सबै कन्जम्पटिभ युज कटाएर 4.79 हामी दिनेवाला छैनौं, त्यो कटाएर चाहिँ नेटमा चाहिँ हाम्रो भन्दाखेरि 6.8 BCM पानी चाहिँ कन्जम्प्टिभ युज कटाएर बचेको पानी भन्ने हाम्रो धारणा छ। अब 3.4 BCM चाहिँ हाम्रो हकको पानी हो कि। इस्यु के हो भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ 3.4 र 3.8 मा अलिअलि कन्फ्युजन चाहिँ छ है, तर 3.8 सम्म पनि आएको छ। 3.4 to 3.8 भनौँ न, 3.8 म्याक्सिमम। 3.8 भनेको BCM भने पानी कति हो त भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ कम्प्लिट बागमती रिभरको चाहिँ बोर्डरमा भएको फ्लो बराबरको पानी हो। द्याट इज टु अमाउन्ट अफ वाटर। त्यत्रो पानी चाहिँ हामीले फ्रीमा दियो भनेदेखि चाहिँ यो पञ्चेश्वरको चाहिँ डिपिआर फाइनल हुने, त्यो पानी चाहिँ दिएन भनेदेखि चाहिँ डिपिआरमा चाहिँ इन्डियाले ल हामी त्यसो भए यदि इन्डिया नेपालले त्यो क्लेम गर्छ। हेर्नुहोस् है कस्तो इन्ट्रेस्टिङ भयो भन्दाखेरि इन्डियनहरू चाहिँ क्लज 3 मा चुकेकै हो। चुके कुन बेला भन्दाखेरि जुन बेला साइन गर्यो त्यसपछि तुरुन्तै रियलाइज गर्यो अनि त्यसपछि त्यो लेटर अफ एक्सचेन्जबाट चाहिँ ल नेपालले चाहिँ उसको पानीको चाहिँ पैसा पाउँदैन भनेर चाहिँ तुरुन्तै लेखिहाल्यो। त्यो कारण के भन्दाखेरि इमिडिएटली रियलाइज गरेको हो कि भोलि चाहिँ यही पैसा क्लेम गर्छ भनेर चाहिँ। तर 1994 देखि 2021 मा आइपुग्दाखेरि फ्रेस वाटरको चाहिँ अवस्था के छ त्यो कुरा त बुझ्नु पर्यो नि। क्लाइमेट चेन्जको अवस्था के छ, पपुलेसनको अवस्था के छ, अनि विभिन्न किसिमका चाहिँ फ्याक्टरहरूले चाहिँ फ्रेस वाटरमा चाहिँ के असर गरिरहेको छ भन्ने कुरा चाहिँ जबसम्म इन्डियाले रियलाइज गर्दैन र नेपालीहरू चाहिँ स्ट्यान्ड चाहिँ आफ्नो लिनै पर्छ। 3.8 BCM पानी चाहिँ त्यसै दिन सकिँदैन। यही नै चाहिँ मेजर इस्युको रूपमा रहेको हुनाले चाहिँ यो प्रब्लम चाहिँ सल्भ भइरहेको छैन र भाइहरूले चाहिँ आगामी BCM चाहिँ बस्न दिन नसक्छ।
Thank you so much, sir. Precisely on 3 minutes. Now I will come back to Dipak sir for the final remarks, including MCC controversy within 2 minutes.
Okay, MCC पुराण गर्न थाल्यो भने त यो त सप्ताह लगाए पनि सकिँदैन है। So but let me tell you, those who are interested,
त्यही भएर एकामा आएको सर, त्यही भएर
एका मिनेट आएको। Okay, please go YouTube मा गएर, if you Google in YouTube my name and MCC or just my name alone in YouTube, you'll get plenty of my talks there. 2019 December 21 I gave a talk with Jivram Bhandari and Sagarmatha STV chat. He was told by his Saujis not to raise MCC. He did, called me, and then he immediately lost his job. And now he's in Yoho Television. Okay, so see that interview. It's on YouTube. It's on MCC. Way back in 2019, we'd already said that. The latest one is on something called Himal Online, I believe. Okay, and there also I've spoken about MCC at length. Now, in summary, the problem with MCC is I gave the history of my involvement with the Americans that gave me insights on MCC from Arun 3. MCC has started from Arun 3 time, by the way. Let's not forget, it's just not now. He's a crap, And then 2004, just after I was no longer minister and had gone down there, that's when Bush had just signed this MCC thing into effect. Now, the problem with MCC is that in summary, I say it is USAID ko sauta. America sarkarle USAID माथि सौता हाल्यो, बुढी स्वास्नीबाट काम लगाएन अनि त्यसै तरुण स्वास्नी चाहियो भनेर यो ल्याएको. Why? Because the USAID method, if America had given this grant through USAID and the work on MCC was to be done through the Vidyut Pradhikaran, I don't think we would have much objection at all. Okay, but this is creating a completely parallel outfit outside of the NEA, which is the only authorized institution to build and run transmission lines of that nature, 400 this thing. It's also 3 times more expensive, just like Arun 3. Okay, Vidyut Pradhikaran has built it at 5 crores per kilometer, the Dhalkewar Muzaffarpur kind of line, 400 kV. MCC is planning to build it at 16 or 18 crores. Okay, now that's a travesty. Okay, then on top of it, MCC is a securitization of development. It is part of the Indo-Pacific strategy. It's very clearly stated. Read the Indo-Pacific strategy document of the US Defense Department. Very clearly states that MCC is our soft arm. Okay, now with this, and it also clearly states IPS is directed against China, Russia, Iran, and so on. Now, how would you like to be a neighbor of China where you are part of a project which states that it's against China? Of course, the Chinese are going to react. So in that sense, this has nothing to do with a 400 kV transmission line, except the cost. It's all about moving to a securitized development that would make Nepal, the Chinese would react, eventually others would react also, and we would lead to end up in a massive insecure situation, losing our neutrality. And that is the problem with MCC.
Thank you so much, sir. It's on exactly 6 p.m. We are on time, and you rightly mentioned, I don't know right or wrong, but you, in your opinion, is a single sentence MCC you define as a securitization of the development. Thank you so much. We had a very great learning. Thank you so much to you for your time and for a very enlightening presentation. With this, before concluding, we will announce the next episode. Jignesh, would you please share the slide? We have worked out for the next 4 episodes down the timeline. The next one would be next slide, please. Jignesh, next slide. Next episode of our Friday talk series would be on irrigation policy, relevance and ways forward in the federal context. We will have Dr. Umesh Nath Parazuli, a towering personality in irrigation and water resources sector, with us, again with a vast knowledge on these specific topics. And we'll love to hear him in the next episode, which is scheduled on Friday, Mungsi 10, 2070 at BS at 5 p.m. Please do not miss it out. And we'll share this announcement along with the flyer later on. We encourage all of you to share through your very good networks widely. And also we have worked out another 3 episodes for the next another 3 months. Next, please. So there will be a 6th, 7th, and 8th episode. We are yet to work out on the speaker, but 6th episode will be on irrigation management. 7th would be on irrigation institutions, and the 8th would be on realizing multi-purpose water infrastructure project, breaking the bottlenecks. So with this, we really thank you all for your precious time. We look forward to your continued presence and encouragement and support to this Friday talk series. Thank you. Namaskar.